Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in our series of Edge of Eternities Commander deck techs. Since EoE is Magic's last in-universe set for 2025, I wanted to showcase some of the cool commander options it gives us beyond just the ones from the precons. I'm releasing a new Edge of Eternities Commander deck every Thursday through the end of September, right before the Spider-Man set drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. So if you have a request for a specific Edge of Eternities commander or a way you'd like to see me build that deck, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today, our commander is Menon, who I believe I'm pronouncing their name right. They are an Ilvoy, which is a supremely cool alien people, Medusa-form beings which evolved to live in gas giants, cloud sculpting those gases into solid material. Menon is a skillful cloud sculptor who's manipulated by the Endstone into finding Tezzeret and becoming his right hand, but I won't give their story away. Check the video's description for a link to the Edge of Eternities fiction below. So before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around the commander. I want to showcase why that commander is cool and why it deserves to helm a 100 card deck. So I take 30 of my cards for my game plan. It's what I want to do while I'm playing the deck and how I try to win with it. I take another 30 cards between these three support categories. Card advantage for things like draw spells, acceleration like ramp spells, and interaction like spot removal. If I need to remove more things, I usually run 1 to 2 Wraths. Sometimes I'll run none, sometimes I'll do more if that will play into my game plan. And I have a floor of 38 lands because I want to hit my land drops because that means I can cast my spells. Let's take a look at our commander and what they do for us. So Menon, the right hand, is a 3/4 flying jellyfish advisor for 3 and double blue that says we can look at the top card of our library at any time, we can cast artifact spells from the top of our library, and the artifacts we control can tap for blue mana that we can spend only to cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand. If it seems like these abilities work together, you are correct. It may be obvious that we're here to play mono blue artifacts, but honestly, Menon's abilities facilitate several different deck building choices: affinity, combo, decks with heavy synergies, and a lot of blue doing what blue does. So I chose a tried and true mono blue strategy: equipment. That's right, we're here to win with commander damage. We have a host of cheap artifacts and a few ways to manipulate what's on top of our deck, and they're all meant to pull out our equipment and make our commander unstoppable. Fully half of our deck is artifacts, and each one we play feeds mana back to the top of our library, dropping more artifacts that make tokens, or draw us cards, or just give us value. It's not a storm deck, but playing it feels like artifacts end up raining down on our playmat, a deluge of value that leaves our opponents spinny-eyed. In a single turn, our humble board can double in size like the clouds have parted and the stars have come out, as our commander themselves walks between the raindrops to strike a killing blow. It's a wild ride, best enjoyed with a patient pod and at least a pretty good soy latte. You'll enjoy this deck if you like sequencing choices and seeing your deck snowball to victory. So let's talk about the game plan itself. Whenever I build these decks, I tag my cards with what they're in the deck to do, what their purpose is that we've given them for including. I also have a considering section at the bottom that has a lot of other cards that, if you want to take a look at them, they will give you options for what you can do to power the deck up or down to make it more of a budget choice, or maybe you have some cards that are expensive already and you just want to include them on your own. But I'm saying all this to make mention of the fact that I have this cheap artifacts category. We're not going to go through this because these artifacts aren't here just to be cheap. We're going to talk about them when we come to their categories. But this is 22 cards in our deck that are artifacts that cost 1 or 2 mana. So lots of different ways we can have them fall onto the battlefield and then tap them immediately with Menon, because they're not creatures, to produce blue mana and cast more things from the top of our library. So noting that we have these cheap artifacts is enough for now. Let's start with our actual game plan, which begins with equipment. We have a Bloodforged Battle Axe to begin things off, a classic card. For a single generic mana, we get an equipment that equips for 2 and gives the equipped creature +2/+0. In general, we're trying to win with commander damage, so I'm just going to talk about Menon as the one that we're equipping. Bloodforged Battle Axe also says whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we make a token that's a copy of Bloodforged Battle Axe. So, something to know about equipment. If you've ever played Magic with someone in paper, and you've seen them attack with a creature that has an aura on it or equipment attached to it, usually they'll attack and tap that creature and whatever's attached to it. But the way it actually works is, if you have a Bloodforged Battle Axe on your commander and you attack with the commander, the Battle Axe doesn't tap. Just the commander does. Which means that Battle Axe, even though it is equipped, can also be tapped to use Menon's ability and have the Battle Axe produce blue mana. Which means that when we do damage with Menon, when the Battle Axe is attached, then we get a copy of the Battle Axe, which it can also tap for mana and also be equipped. Now that mana, just to mention it once now, can only be used to cast spells, and it's only spells from outside of our hand. But being able to keep putting Battle Axes on Menon and have them all make token copies whenever Menon does combat damage while these are equipped, that gives us a lot more artifacts that we can tap for mana and a lot more ways to make more artifacts. So you're starting to see the snowballing effect of a lot of the cards we have, even from this first card here. Next up we have Candlestick. Candlestick is from Murders at Karlov Manor. It costs 1 blue. It is a clue equipment, so it has the clue ability, which is pay 2 and sacrifice it, not necessarily tap it, to draw a card. Candlestick equips for 2, and it gives equipped creature +1/+1 and an attack trigger of when it attacks, surveil 2. So surveilling is always nice value, but especially in this deck, we care about manipulating the top of our library. We want the top of our library, which we can look at any time, always to have an artifact on it, because we always want to be able to cast something from it. Why not have that kind of card advantage? So Candlestick is a great example with its surveil trigger of showing us what we want to do when we're able to do some card selection on top of our library. If you have the top card and you're looking at it and it's just a land, unless you're desperate for land, put it in the graveyard with the surveil trigger. It's better to have something that we can use and we can cast off the top of our library than something we can't. Even if that's something that we can't cast, it could be pretty good for us, with the exception of lands when we're trying to build up our land base. Because you're not going to see the bottom few cards of your library anyway. So putting cards in your graveyard and not having access to them because of that is the same as if you didn't see them in the first place. It's better to throw away the things you can't use in order to dig to the things that you can. So that's my little spiel on card selection, and Candlestick gives it to us with that surveil trigger. And if ever we need to, we could tap this for blue, or sacrifice it because it's a clue. Or tap this and float that blue that we can only use to cast spells, and then pay 2 other mana to crack it. So we've gotten its value out of it, and we've still got the blue floating from it. Next up is Skyblinder Staff from Gatecrash. For 1 generic mana, we get an equipment that equips for 3, and gives equipped creature +1/+0, and they can't be blocked by creatures with flying. This is a wild card to me, but our commander flies. So our commander already has great evasive ability. When we have Skyblinder Staff equipped to Menon, that means Menon can only be blocked by creatures with reach. So sure, we're going to have some green players at the table, possibly, but how much reach is there in Commander? If people can block flyers, it's usually because they have flyers. This is not our commander becomes unblockable, but it's an unexpected card that only costs us 1, so it's easy to get off the top of our library, and it can make our commander almost unblockable. Pretty neat include. And, as usual, we can also tap this for blue mana to cast more artifacts from the top of our library, or anywhere that isn't our hand. Next is Adaptive Omni Tool from the Aetherdrift Commander product. This is 2 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 3 and gives equipped creature +1/+1 for each artifact we control. Remember, we have 50 artifacts in our deck. It also says whenever that creature attacks, not hits. Remember, Bloodforged Battle Axe triggers on combat damage, Candlestick and Adaptive Omni Tool trigger on just attacking. It says, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You can reveal an artifact from them, put it in your hand, and the rest go on the bottom of your library in a random order. That's great because it draws us a card, but it's also great because maybe we have a land on top, or maybe we've got an enchantment on top, something we can't cast. This is another card selection ability. It lets us find an artifact, hopefully, from the top 6 cards, but at the very least, we sort of get a reroll for what's on top of our library, and hopefully we can find something that's better than what there was before. Next is Blackblade Reforged from Dominaria 2018 originally, a classic Voltron card. For 2 generic mana, we get a legendary equipment that gives equipped creature +1/+1 for each land we control. That's a great way to make Menon big. Menon should be big because Menon should be killing people. Blackblade Reforged equips for 7, but if we're equipping a legendary creature, like our commander, it only equips for 3. Pretty okay. Ilvoy Lightjammer is next. For 1 and a blue, we get an equipment that equips for 3 and gives the equipped creature +1/+2. That's alright, but it also has Flash, and it snaps on. When this equipment enters, attach it to target creature you control, and until end of turn, that creature gains hexproof. So this is a protective spell. We can play this out when someone has targeted Menon with something. Menon gets hexproof, it fizzles. Snap-on equipment are always fun, but it's also worth noting that this is a 2-mana artifact with Flash. So if it's on top of our library, we can cast it at Flash speed. We can do this on our opponent's turns, and then Menon will be able to have hexproof and +1/+2. That's pretty great. Similarly, Silver Shroud Costume costs 2 generic, equips for 3, but it has Flash and it also snaps on. And it says, when you the creature you attach it to when it enters gains Shroud until end of turn. So if you're not familiar with Shroud, hexproof means the creature that's hexproof, or the permanent that's hexproof, can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. Shroud is a precursor to hexproof that just says it can't be the target of spells or abilities, period. So having Shroud is not ideal for us compared to hexproof, because if Menon has Shroud until end of turn, that means we can't equip it with other equipment until end of turn, because equipping targets. But it does protect us, and even better than that, Silver Shroud Costume says equipped creature can't be blocked. This is just better evasion than Skyblinder Staff would have given us. So yeah, just unblockable for as long as this is equipped to Menon. That sounds pretty great to me. And something else that's worth mentioning about equipment, beyond just the fact that with Menon we can tap them for blue to cast spells from outside of our hand, is that if Menon happens to be removed, these aren't auras. They are just going to sit on the battlefield. So we can re-equip them later if we need to, and their equipment costs are not that expensive. I mean, 3 mana is not a small amount, but it's not a lot. So keeping these in play is great, and unless our opponent has a bunch of artifact removal that they want to use on these equipment rather than some of our more powerful artifacts, we're going to get to keep them and get to keep using them. Like I mentioned, we have plenty of good artifacts in this deck, and not a lot of people that I have seen are running Vandal Blast these days. So next up we have Swiftfoot Boots, another classic. I'm glad they reprinted this in Foundations. Everyone needs some Swifties. For 2 generic mana, we get an equipment that equips for just 1, and it gives equipped creature hexproof and haste. So as opposed to the Lightjammer and the Shroud Costume, we get to keep our protective ability. And haste may not be nothing. We might be able to put that on Menon the turn that it comes in. Turn that they come in, pardon me. Next up we have Sword of the Animist. We have a few slightly more expensive cards in this deck, as in more than $10. I tend to try and avoid those. Check the considering section for some other options, but these just really work well for us. Sword of the Animist costs 2. It's a legendary equipment that equips for 2 and gives the equipped creature +1/+1. And when it attacks, again an attack trigger, not a sabotage trigger where it has to do the damage, it lets us rampant growth. Search for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So this doesn't just find us land and give us the ability to have mana for the next turn, it also shuffles our library, so it resets the top of our deck, which can always be relevant for us. The reality chip is even more cool in this deck. So if you've never seen a reconfigure creature before, here's how this works. For 1 and a blue, we get an 0/4 jellyfish. It's a legendary artifact creature, equipment jellyfish, that just has the ability, we may look at the top card of our library at any time. So the same thing that Wincon gives us. However, we can reconfigure it, which means for 2 and a blue, we can attach the reality chip to our creature, to Wincon, as though it were an equipment, because it is an equipment. And when we do that, as long as it's attached, the reality chip is no longer a creature, it's just an artifact equipment. We can also use reconfigure to unattach it, and anytime the reality chip is not attached, it's a creature. Anytime it's attached, it's not a creature. So kind of a little weird idea, but reconfigure just says this is equipment and it is a creature, just whatever you need it to be in that moment, kind of. In addition, as long as the reality chip is attached to a creature, we can play lands and cast spells from the top of our library. So that's better than what Wincon gives us. We can play lands off the top of our library. We can cast non-artifact spells off the top of our library, which I guess we could have already done, but we have to draw them first. Regardless, the reality chip is a lot of fun in this deck. Next up is one of my favorite cards for any Voltron deck. It's Trailblazer's Boots. An equipment that costs 2 and equips for 2 and gives a equipped creature non-basic land walk, which means it can't be blocked as long as the defending player controls a non-basic land, just one. When have you played against someone in Commander who only plays basic lands? Maybe in Commander Limited, but Trailblazer's Boots essentially says equipped creature is unblockable. Seems pretty great. Next we have Nettle Cyst. For 3 generic mana, we get an equipment that equips for 2 and gives equipped creature +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment we control. So similar to Adaptive Omni Tool, but it also counts our enchantments. However, it's also a living weapon, which means when it enters, we make a 0/0 black Phyrexian germ creature token and attach Nettle Cyst to it. So Nettle Cyst is counting itself. So even if it's the only artifact we have in play, we're going to make that 0/0 token, and before it dies to state-based actions, it's going to be equipped with Nettle Cyst. So it'll be a 1/1 if we have no other artifacts. When we move Nettle Cyst off of it by equipping it to Wincon, yeah, the 0/0 is going to die if we don't have something else giving it more toughness. But that germ really only exists to hold the Nettle Cyst for us while we're making our commander really big with it. Or until we can make our commander big. Next up, little bit of an expensive card, but of all the Sword of X and Y's, this is the one that I think fits the deck best. Sword of Forge and Frontier is 3 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 2. It gives equipped creature +2/+2 and protection from red and from green. So if you don't know protection grants debt, D-E-B-T. It means the creature can't be dealt damage from a red or a green source. The creature can't have anything attached to it. So equip is the E, but also, enchanted from a red or green source. It can't be blocked by a creature that's red or green, and it can't be targeted by a red or a green source. So great protection here. Most notably, it gives it evasion. So anyone who's trying to block is going to have to block with something white, black, or blue, or colorless, I guess, because it can't block with red or green. In addition, Sword of Forge and Frontier says whenever equipped creature deals combat damage, so this isn't an attack trigger, it's an on-damage trigger, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn, and you may play an additional land this turn. So we can play an additional land. It doesn't have to be from those 2 cards that we exiled, but it sure can be. So this is good for 2 reasons. It gets things off the top of our library, so it maybe clears out things that we couldn't cast off the top of our library, but also it puts things in exile, and we're allowed to cast those things, which means we can cast these spells and they aren't in our hand, which means we can tap our artifacts for blue to cast those things, even if they themselves are not artifacts, because Wincon only gives us the permission to cast artifacts from the top of our library. But if we have permission to cast things from other places beyond our hand, like Sword of Fortune Frontier does, we can use that mana that our artifacts are making to do so. We could even tap this sword to cast those things. So if we wanted to get out an enchantment or a creature, and we've exiled it with Sword of Fortune Frontier, we can cast it using the mana from our artifacts. Last is Brass Knuckles. This is from Streets of New Capenna, and it's a card I've wanted to put in a commander deck for a long time. I think it's really fun in this deck. If you want to spend a little bit more money and have something a little more consistent, Genji Glove from the Final Fantasy set is in the considering section. It just seemed like it was more expensive in terms of currency and mana than what I really wanted to do. So Brass Knuckles is 4 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1, but it says when you cast this spell, copy it. So that means you're not getting 1 copy of Brass Knuckles on the battlefield, you're getting this and a token copy of it as well. So 2 artifacts for 4 mana, both of which you can tap for blue if you need to. What the Brass Knuckles actually gives you is equipped creature has double strike, as long as 2 or more equipment are attached to it. So if Menon's already out and has the Trailblazer's boots on, you cast Brass Knuckles, you get 2 copies of it, you equip 1 of them, and now Menon is wearing the boots and the knuckles, and therefore is able to, it has double strike. So double strike in a Voltron deck is usually great. We can put both copies of Brass Knuckles on something, just a total of 6 mana to do that. But if we have multiple creatures, maybe we want to spread our Brass Knuckles around. For example, maybe the Nettle Cyst has come out, and this germ is equipped with a Nettle Cyst, and we put a Brass Knuckles on it. Then we put the other Brass Knuckles and the boots, let's say, on Menon, and we can attack with both. Are they going to block this big thing? They probably can't block Menon, and we get double strike for both of them. Brass Knuckles is great, and it's one of these cards that gives us a token in addition to itself, so we've got more mana than just the 1 to tap for. Alright, that's our equipment section. Let's talk about how we use that equipment to get in with our commander. Here is our little baby evasion section. We've seen some of this already. Skyblinder's staff makes it so flyers can't block our flyer. Silver Shroud costume and Trailblazer's boots make our creature unblockable, or pretty much, and Sword of Fortune Frontier gets past all the red and green creatures. Canine Mark I from the Doctor Who set is a legendary artifact creature robot dog. It's a 1/1 for a single blue with 3 abilities, but we're not interested in the Doctor's Companion ability. The first ability is negative. As long as it is untapped, our legendary creatures beyond it have Ward 1. So it protects our commander a little bit. Why would we want to tap it? Well, we could, once it doesn't have Summoning Sickness anymore, tap it for blue mana to cast spells from outside our hand, but we can also pay a 1 and a blue and tap it to make a legendary creature we control, or a legendary creature, unblockable until end of turn. So notice, I thought it was just something we control. We're probably going to use it on Menon, but if we don't need to, we could use this politically. We could say, hey, your commander, or that other legendary thing you have, can't be blocked this turn. If you attack someone else, just don't attack me. You make a little deal. Politics and commander is always fun. So Canine is a useful card for just 1 blue mana. But maybe even less expected card is Senator Peacock from the Clue set. For 3 and double blue, we get a 3/4 human advisor that says, artifacts we control are clues, in addition to their other types, and have the clue text. Pay 2, sack it, draw a card. So we can, with Senator Peacock in play, we can sacrifice every artifact on our board as long as we have the mana to do it. But also, whenever we sacrifice a clue, target creature can't be blocked this turn. So Senator Peacock basically says, do you have any artifacts? Well, you can pay 2, sacrifice it, and draw a card, and Menon is unblockable this turn. And you can do that every turn. So if we need to sacrifice a clue just to draw a card, if we need to sacrifice a clue because it will let us draw a card, but we're not that concerned about drawing a card, we're just concerned about getting whatever card is on top of our library off of it so that we can maybe cast something beneath it. Either way, Senator Peacock's giving us the ability to do a lot with that. And the kickback on that powerful ability is the ability we care about, which makes Menon unblockable. Really cool. So we've seen how to make Menon evasive. Let's talk some more about card selection and see how we're making sure that the cards on top of our library are the ones we want to be there. So we've talked about the candlestick already. It lets us surveil when we attack with it, when we attack with the equipped creature. Next we have a Candy Trail. This is from Wilds of Eldraine. It costs 1. It's a food clue. When it enters, we scry 2. So scrying is great for us, not just because we can, move cards around between the top and the bottom of our library, or I guess from the top to the bottom if we wish, but we can also rearrange them. Maybe we have, like I may have mentioned already, an artifact creature on top of our library and a non-creature artifact. We want to make sure that the non-creature artifact is on top so we can cast it first and then tap it for mana to cast the artifact creature, because artifact creatures have summoning sickness, so we can't tap them for that blue mana the turn they come in. Also, Candy Trail is a food, but also a clue. So for 2 and tap and sacrifice it, we gain 3 life and draw a card. So one more way that we can get selection off the top by just getting that card off the top, other than scrying. Maybe we scry and we see 2 lands, we put them on the bottom, we crack this and draw another land. And then we get to see what was under those 3 lands. Next up, a classic card for the kind of deck that wants to manipulate the top of your library is Codex Shredder. This is a 1 mana artifact that lets us tap to make a player mill a card. Who's milling? We're milling. We want to get cards off the top of our library if we can't use them, and into our graveyard is a great place to do it. It might even be an artifact that we just don't have the mana to cast and we're trying to get something else. But if you're worried about throwing away our lands or throwing away our enchantments or anything else we're milling, we can always get it back later by paying 5, tapping and sacking Codex Shredder to regrow something. We return a card from our graveyard to our hand. Next up is Witching Well, another Eldraine card, but from Throne of Eldraine, my favorite set. For a single blue, we get an artifact that when it enters, we scry 2, so same as Candy Trail. But its other ability is pay 3 and a blue and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. It's kind of like a clue in that way, even though it's not typed as a clue, because it doesn't require you to tap it. So this is one of those cards that we can tap it for blue, float that mana, and then pay a different 3 and a blue to crack it and draw 2 cards. Next up is Limbus from the Lord of the Rings set. For 2 generic mana, we get a food that when it enters, we opt. We scry 1 and draw. That's pretty great already. We get a little card selection both ways. It's food, so we can pay 2, tap it, and sack it to gain 3 life. But for any reason it's put into a graveyard when it is, we shuffle it back into our library. So it will not just let us scry and let us draw, but when it shuffles into our library, we're getting a shuffle effect. So we might crack it, gain the 3 life, but not care about the 3 life. We're just trying to get whatever's on top of our library off of the top of our library. So this goes back into our library, we get to shuffle, and we'll see what else is on top now. Next up is Mazemind Tome. I really like that they put this back in Foundations. This is a great card. For 2 generic mana, we get an artifact that we can tap to put a page counter on it and scry 1. So page counters don't do anything on their own. They're just a type of counter that Mazemind Tome cares about. So this is a little bit of a scry. For 2 and tap, instead of scrying, we can put a page counter on it and draw a card. And when there are 4 or more page counters on this artifact, we exile it and we gain 4 life. So we only get to use it 4 times to scry or to draw. But we can always pay 2 for this and then tap it for blue using the ability Menon gives it, and use that blue mana to cast things from outside our hand. Next we have the Reality Chip, which we've already seen. But after that we have Emry. Oh, Emry's so cool in this, and again, originally printed in Throne of Eldraine. Emry is 2 and a blue for a 1/2 legendary merfolk wizard. But she isn't really, because she has affinity for artifacts, which means she costs 1 generic mana less for each artifact we control. So in our deck, she's a 1/2 wizard for a single blue, typically. When she enters, we also mill 4 cards, and then we can tap her and choose an artifact in our graveyard, and we can cast that card this turn. So she's giving us permission to cast an artifact card from our graveyard, which means we have permission to cast a card from outside our hand, which means we can tap our artifacts to produce mana to cast that card. It has to be an artifact, of course, because that's what Emery says, but it's in our graveyard. It's not on top of our library. We can still use our blue mana from tapping our artifacts to cast it. Plus, Emery mills 4 cards, so that gets something off the top of our library. Hopefully it puts something good in the graveyard that we can next turn tap Emery to cast, but even if not, we've at least gotten whatever was on top of our library off of it so that we can see what's underneath. Next up, I think this card is just really cool. It's Lantern of Revealing from the Baldur's Gate set. For 3 generic mana, it's a manalith. It comes in, it taps for 1 mana of any color. But also, we can pay 4 and tap it to look at the top card of our library, and if it's a land card, we can put that onto the battlefield tapped, and if we don't, we can put it on the bottom of our library. What this means is, this is tapping for blue mana that's not restricted to casting spells from outside our hand. We can cast spells in our hand with this. It's a mana rock. But its second ability is great, because sometimes we get stuck. We end up with a land on top of our library, and we can see that it's there because of Menon. So we activate Lantern of Revealing, and we look at the top card of our library, which we are already able to do, and if it's a land, instead of trying to mill it or scry it to the bottom, we just put it on the battlefield tapped. That's a little bit of ramp for us right there. And if the card that's underneath it is something we can cast, then we've gotten the card selection we're looking for from it. If the top card of our library isn't a land, but we still don't want it, we just put it on the bottom. It's great. Next up, we have Master Transmuter, an awesome card that I don't think I've ever put in a deck, but I really like it. For 3 and a blue, we get a 1/2 artifact creature human artificer. Let's actually look at the Oracle text for this. I don't think it's any different. Yeah, it's a little bit different, but it's just for wording choices. So this is an artifact, even though it's a creature, so we can cast it off the top of our library. It can't tap for blue the first turn it comes in because it's a creature, but it does have this ability. For a single blue and tap and return an artifact we control to our hand, we can put an artifact from our hand onto the battlefield. Now, why is that good? It's good because we might have the Temporal Anchor, a 6 mana artifact, in our hand, and Limbus on the battlefield. So Master Transmuter lets us pay 1 and tap them to bounce Limbus to our hand and put this into play. It's giving us the ability to just, in a way that's like ramp, but it's just, we're putting a 6 mana card into play and bouncing one of our many 1 or 2 drops in the process. This gets us cards out of our hand that we might not have the mana to cast normally. We have so much mana from our artifacts in play because Menon is letting us tap them for mana that we can spend for spells outside of our hand. But what if we have something in our hand? Well, we use the mana to cast something from the top of our library that's cheap, and then use Master Transmuter to bounce that cheap thing and get something from in our hand out. It's always artifacts, but it's going to come up more than it seems like it will. Even if only once per turn, that's pretty great. Next is the Temporal Anchor itself. This card is bad, but in our deck, it's very good. For 3 and triple blue, we get a legendary artifact that says at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 2. But it's not really scrying, because when you choose to put 1 or more cards on the bottom of your library while scrying, exile those cards. Exile that many cards from the bottom of your library. So those are the cards you did. And then during your turn, you may play cards exiled with the Temporal Anchor. So it's saying you're not scrying to the top or the bottom, you're scrying to the top or to exile. And then you can just play those cards that are exiled. If it was a land, you can play it for your land drop. If it was any spell, you can use the mana that your artifacts produce, thanks to Menon, to cast it, because it's in exile, it's not in your hand. We can do that even with non-artifact cards. And what's even better than this is, it doesn't say, you may play those cards this turn. It says, you can play those cards during your turn, any of your turns, so long as you still control the Temporal Anchor. So, being able to sort of draw these cards into exile, rather than scrying them, Sometimes we might want to do that just with those 2 cards. And even if we didn't care about any of the rest of this, a free Scry 2 at the start of every turn, that gets us into something we can cast, in all likelihood, from the top of our library. And I think it's definitely worth 6 mana to get this effect every turn. So that is our game plan. That's all the things that we're trying to do in this deck. We have a few more things that will help it, but let's move on to our support section and talk about those 3 categories of support that I talked about before. We're going to go to our card advantage section. Now I use the word draw here. It's just a shorthand for card advantage. It doesn't mean that necessarily everything in this section is something we are drawing. So we'll start with Aether Spellbomb. This is a cheap artifact, 1 generic for an artifact with 2 abilities. Either pay a blue and sack it to bounce a creature, or pay a generic and sack it to draw a card. We can do either one. Both are pretty good. We can also, as usual, play this from the top of our library and then tap it for blue to play the next thing off the top of our library. Maybe it's this candlestick we've already seen. And then neither of these require us to tap, so we can pay a blue or a generic from a different source, of course, to crack the Spellbomb and do something good with it. We've seen our Candy Trail and our Codex Shredder. We haven't seen Surgical Skullbomb, which is a little bit like Aether Spellbomb combined. It's a generic mana, and it has Aether Spellbomb's second ability as its first. Pay 1, sack it, draw a card. Or, as a sorcery only, we can pay 2 and a blue and sack it to bounce a creature and draw a card. So it's a little slower, but it's both at the same time. Sometimes you just want to double up. What's also notable about this is, just like the Spellbomb, neither of these abilities require it to tap, so we can float mana for spells outside our hand before we do this. We've seen our Witching Well and our Omni Tool. Both of these give us the ability to get more cards in hand. Witching Well by cracking it, Omni Tool by with the attack trigger. It's not drawing cards, but it is giving us another card probably. Next is Clan Crafter, which I think is so much fun. It is a Baldur's Gate background. For 1 and a blue, we get a legendary enchantment that says commander creatures you own have an additional line of text. For 2 generic and sacrifice an artifact, put a 1/1 counter on this creature and draw a card. So pay 2, sack an artifact, and draw. That's just making something into a clue without typing it as one. And it pumps up our commander, which is a Voltron commander who's trying to win with commander damage. This is great because it takes all of our artifacts in play and makes them pump spells and draw spells. And if we need a way to get an artifact into the graveyard so that maybe we can recast it with Imri, we've got a way to do that. If we need to really get something off the top of our library, we can crack a different artifact and then put a counter on Menon and draw that card off the top of our library. So many useful things we can do with Clan Crafter. All it requires is that we have Menon in play, and that's what we're trying to do anyway. Really cool include in this deck, I think. Next is a tricksy one. This is Howling Mine, one of the very old cards that we have in this deck. I remember this from the 90s. Howling Mine is a 2-mana artifact that in current templating says, at the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card. So the ability to pay to get a cheap artifact off the top of our library, and then at the beginning of our draw steps we draw a card, I think that's pretty okay on its own, even if everyone else is getting one. But this says if Howling Mine is untapped. If we have Menon in play, we can tap Howling Mine for blue mana. We don't even have to spend it on anything. Just tap it, let the mana empty from our mana pool as we pass the turn, and Howling Mine is tapped for everyone else's turn. Then it untaps during our turn, during our draw step, we get another card, and then we can tap it for mana and use that mana or not during our turn, and just have Howling Mine only work for us and essentially be a mana rock in addition. However, we can also be a little political with this. Maybe we don't tap it during our turn, and we say to our player, to the opponent on our left, who's going next, we say, hey, if I let you draw an extra card during your draw step, what will you give me? Will you ignore me for a little while and focus your attention on someone else? Will you help me during an alpha strike on a different opponent next turn? What is this extra card draw worth to you? or you just make them a deal. You say, hey, if you leave me alone for a turn cycle, I'll give you a card. Maybe that card is worth it. Maybe it's not, but they get to choose, and you have the option to give that to them. You can't do that as easily for the person on your right, since we're going clockwise, but I guess it's conceivable that you might make a deal with the person on your left and the person on their left to gang up on the person on your right, on the second person's left. But if you really want to, you could sort of, group hug it for a second. It's like, look, anyone want to ignore me for the next turn if I give you a card for it? If the whole table says yes, you just don't tap your Howling Mine. Lots of fun with that. Yeah, I just really like this, the way of doing this. There is at least one other card that works this way in the considering section on the Moxfield page, so check that out in the deck's description, or the video's description. Next, we have Investigator's Journal. This is a 2-mana clue artifact that enters with a number of suspect counters on it equal to the greatest number of creatures a player controls. So suspect counters that's just a type of counter that Investigator's Journal cares about. It doesn't have sort of an inherent meaning. It just means this just says, whoever's got the most creatures, pick them. This comes in with that many counters on it. We can either pay 2 and tap this and remove a counter to draw a card, or we can pay 2 and sack this to draw a card. We can do both in the same turn if we want to. Pay 2, tap this, remove a suspect counter, draw a card, pay 2 more and sacrifice this, even if it has counters still on it, and draw another card if we're desperate to draw cards or to get things off the top of our library. But remember, even though this is a card that it looks like all it does is just give us card draw or manipulate the top of our library, we can still tap this for mana if we don't want to tap it to remove suspect counters. And once we do that, we can float that mana and crack it to draw a card. We've seen Limbus and Maze Mind Tome. That's good. Mind Stone. I guess we haven't seen it yet. Mind Stone is too generic. It taps for colorless. We could pay 1 tap and sack it to draw a card. This is a great ramp card, but we can also use it to draw, especially late game if we need to. And of course, drawing doesn't just give us cards, it gives us the ability to see the next card in the top of our library. After that, we have Esoteric Duplicator. This is so cool, from the Big Score. For 2 and a blue, we get a clue artifact that has the clue text, sack it, draw a card if we pay 2. But it also says whenever you sacrifice it or another artifact, you may pay 2, and if you do, at the end step, you make a copy of the artifact you sacrificed. It's a token copy. So that lets us, just for the Esoteric Duplicator, we can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card, and when we do that, we can pay an additional 2 from this triggered ability, and we get another Esoteric Duplicator, a token copy of it, during our end step. That's so cool. We could just keep doing this if we want to. But even better than that, maybe we sacrifice the Mind Stone for 1 and tap and sack it. We pay 2, we get another Mind Stone at the end of our turn, which is untapped. We can use the mana for it later. We can do this with any number of our artifacts that sacrifice themselves, or any of the effects like Clan Crafter or Senator Peacock that let us treat our cards as clues or sack them other ways. An Esoteric Duplicator can give us more and more of those cards. So it seems like a lot of fun. Like Investigator's Journal, we tap it to float a blue, we pay 2 more to sack it, we pay an additional 2 more to make a copy of it. At the end of turn, we get another Investigator's Journal, which we could then tap for another blue, either during our end step or someone else's turn, if we've got like a flash enchantment, or a flash artifact, I should say. So the Duplicator is pretty sweet. Next, we have Repurposing Bay from Aetherdrift. For 2 and a blue, it's Birthing Pod for artifacts. We pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice an artifact, another outlet for it, to search our library for an artifact card with mana value 1 higher than the sacrificed artifact's mana value. We put that card into the battlefield and shuffle. We can just do this as a sorcery. So if we want to find our Esoteric Duplicator, maybe we sacrifice our Limbus. Limbus goes to our graveyard, gets shuffled back into our library, we find the Duplicator, we get to see something brand new on the top of our library, and now we have the Duplicator and Limbus is in our library again. It's also worth noting that while there are some cards in this that make copies, like Esoteric Duplicator does, of other cards, Repurposing Bay can sacrifice a token, like a token that doesn't have a mana value, and that's treated like it has mana value 0, which means we could sacrifice a food token, just a regular food token that we may have made somehow, and go find Candy Trail, or go find either Spell Bomb, or Witching Well, or Codex Shredder, whatever we may need in that moment. Repurposing Bay is a great way to get what we need when we need it. What I like to do, since we're playing a deck that has a lot of we're doing a lot of things. We're taking a lot of game actions on our turn, and our sequencing is important. So in order to not slow down the pod, the commander pod, not necessarily the birthing pod, what I like to do is have a list, either printed out or on my phone or something, of all of the artifacts in our library in mana value order. So I already know, in general, what I want, or at least what I can get, when I sacrifice a particular artifact. If I'm sacrificing my Maze Mind Tome to Repurposing Bay, I want to know all of the artifacts in my library that cost 3 mana, because that's what I can go get with them. So having that ahead of time really helps with the play of it. We've seen our Swords of Forge and Frontier. Ooh, let's talk about Oracle's Vault. What a cool card. What a really, really cool card. All right, Oracle's Vault is 4 generic mana for an artifact that says pay 2 and sack it, pay 2 and tap it rather. Exile the top card of your library until end of turn. You can play that card and put a brick counter on this vault. Again, the brick counters don't mean anything other than to the vault. So this just means get something off the top of your library, and now you can cast it. Now you can play it. So if there's a land on top of your library, or a non-artifact creature, or maybe an enchantment, pay 2 and tap this. That thing goes into exile, and you can tap your artifacts using Menon's ability to produce mana to cast that spell. And if it's a land, maybe you haven't made your land drop. You can now. Just all that for 2 and tap is pretty great. But once it has 3 or more brick counters on it, you can tap it and exile the top card of your library and play that card without paying its mana cost. So this lets you build towards something really exciting, but even the first ability is great in this deck. I really like Oracle's Vault in this deck. Sad Robot, Solemn Simulacrum. We love this buddy. 4 generic mana for a 2/2 artifact golem. When it enters, we ramp at growth. When it dies, we draw. It's here mostly for the ramp, but we can draw it as well. Maybe we can replay it with Emery later on. In any case, we can cast it off the top of our library, and while we can't tap it for blue mana the turn it comes in because it's a creature, we're getting it for the rampant growth. So yeah, we're doing great with the Sad Robot. Love this buddy. Next we have Thopter Spy Network. For 2 and double blue, we have an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, so you know, if you're playing this deck, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So we get a little flyer. It's an artifact creature. It can block. On its next turn, when it doesn't have summoning sickness, we can tap it for blue with Menon's ability. And also, whenever 1 or more artifact creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So we have the chance of drawing a couple of cards for someone who doesn't have any flying blockers or any reach blockers throughout the game. There are other enchantments we could be running that can make more Thopters for us, or maybe more consistent Thopters. But I think that 1 per turn is pretty okay. And the ability to occasionally draw cards seems exciting to me, because what does drawing a card mean again? It means getting things off the top of our library so we can cast other spells from it. So I like that Supply Network. Tamio's Journal is even better. For 5 generic mana, we get a legendary artifact that says at the beginning of your upkeep, investigate. Thopters? Yeah, they fly and they can block, but we can't tap them immediately. Clues, we can. At the beginning of our upkeep, we just get an artifact just for free, and we could crack it and manipulate the top of our library, or we can just tap it for blue, or we can do both. Tamio's Journal, that's just worth 5 on its own. But in addition, if we tap it and sacrifice 3 clues, which means generally clue tokens, or clues like Esoteric Duplicator, or any of our artifacts if we control Senator Peacock, then we can Demonic Tutor. We search our library for a card, put it in our hand, and shuffle. We don't have to reveal it even. It just costs us 3 clues. And we could take those clues and tap them for blue mana, thanks to Menon's ability, before we sacrifice them. And then we've found a card from our library, put it in our hand, and we've shuffled, and now we have something new on top of our library. We can use that 3 floating mana maybe to cast. Pretty great. Next is the Might Stone and Weak Stone. This is such a cool card. For 5 generic mana, we get a legendary Power Stone. When it enters, we can either draw 2 cards or give target creature -5/-5 until end of turn. So it's a draw spell or a removal spell, but it's also a ramp spell. It's a Power Stone. It can tap for 2 colorless mana, but as a Power Stone, that mana it can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells. This mana can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells sounds crazy, but it's the quickest way to say, if you want to use this mana to cast a spell, the spell has to be an artifact. If it's not being used on a spell, for example, maybe it's being used for an ability, then that's fine. You can use it for abilities. It's just if you use it for a spell, that spell has to be an artifact spell. Luckily, we can cast artifacts off the top of our library, so this is great for that. Power Stone mana is restrictive, but so is the mana that our artifacts are tapping for as blue, which, again, if we really need blue mana to cast something from somewhere other than our hand, we can use the Might Stone and Weak Stone to tap for that rather than this Power Stone mana. And if that blue card is somewhere other than our hand or the top of our library, and we have permission to cast it somehow, like, say, Temporal Anchor has given us permission to cast it from exile, we can tap the Might Stone and Weak Stone for a blue, thanks to Menon, and use that mana. Lots of cool stuff we can do with this buddy. Next we have Transmutation Font, also from the Big Score. Really great card. 5 generic mana for an artifact. It comes in and we can tap it for blue, or we can tap it to make a blood, clue, or food token, which we can then tap that token for blue. And we can do that every turn. So we've seen what these tokens do. A clue, you pay 2 and sack it without tapping, to draw a card. Food, you pay 2, tap and sack it to gain 3 life. If you haven't seen a blood token before, it is pay 1, tap it, sack it, and discard a card to draw a card. So it's a way to maybe get something into your graveyard, it's a way to get something off the top of your library, and to draw a card, and it costs 1 mana less than that clue token. So blood token, not terrible, maybe not as good as clues or food, but okay. In this deck at least. However, Transmutation Font lets us also pay 3 generic mana and tap it, and sacrifice 3 artifact tokens with different names to search our library for an artifact, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle, but only as a sorcery. That's crazy. We have lots of ways to make tokens, artifact tokens that have different names, and as long as they're tokens and they have different names, we're good. We just pay 3, tap this, and sack those things. Remember, Esoteric Duplicator can make a token copy of any artifact that we've sacrificed. And we have other kinds of defined tokens in this deck as well, which you'll see soon. We've seen the Temporal Anchor, so let's talk about Thought Monitor. Thought Monitor seems like an expensive card. It's 7 mana, 6 and a blue, for a 2/2 flying artifact creature that when it enters we draw 2 cards, but Thought Monitor has affinity for artifacts, which means it costs 1 generic less for each artifact we have in play. Which means in this deck, a lot of the times, Thought Monitor is a 2/2 flyer that draws us 2 cards that only costs a single blue mana. If it costs more than that, that's okay. I mean, how much would you pay for a 2/2 flyer that draws 2 cards? If you said 5 mana, that's a Muldrifter. If you said 3 mana, that's a Muldrifter that you've only evoked. This is a solid card. And in this deck, I mean, 50 artifacts, 49 other artifacts besides this. You're going to get some good card draw, which, remember, just clears the top of your library to cast more artifacts from it. So that is our draw section, isn't it? Yes, that's our card advantage section, I should say. Let's talk about acceleration, which again, I've just shorthanded as ramp. So we're going to start with our Moonsnare prototype. This is a single blue for an artifact that says tap and tap an untapped artifact or creature you control to add a generic mana. So I know you're thinking, if I can already tap all of my artifacts for blue mana, why would I tap this and something else to add 1 colorless mana? It's colorless mana, it's said. The reason is because the blue mana can only be spent, the blue mana that all your artifacts tap for can only be spent to cast spells outside your hand. This colorless mana can be spent on whatever you want. So maybe it's worth it to you to tap your Moonsnare prototype and a clue token to make a single generic mana to contribute to casting something from your hand. It might be necessary, you never know. But even if you don't need it that way, you can if this ends up in your hand, you can channel it, which means while it's in your hand, you can pay 4 and a blue and discard it to force the owner of a non-land permanent to put it on top or bottom of their library. Now they get to choose top or bottom, but this is a pretty solid removal effect. It doesn't require that creature be a certain mana value or have a certain toughness. It doesn't require it to be a creature at all. It could just be something big. Someone has spent, let's say, 6 mana on something. We're spending 5 and a card to make them spend that 6 mana again if they want to put it on top of their library, and it slows down their draws in the process. And if they really don't want their draws to be slowed down, it goes to the bottom of their library, which is the worst place for something to be. Usually, worst, maybe? In any case, a pretty good removal spell, as long as we're not throwing it on something or hitting something with it that has, a really powerful enters effect, like Spine of Ishzaw or something along those lines. I like the flexibility here. If we're talking about ramp, we're talking about Soul Ring. Costs a generic mana, taps for 2 colorless. There's not much else to say about it. Works great for me. Arcane Signet is pretty similar. For 2 generic, it taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So it taps for blue. I'll just mention Sky Diamond at the same time because it's the same thing in this deck as our Arcane Signet, except it comes in tapped. That's not ideal, but having a second Arcane Signet is pretty alright. We've talked about our Mind Stone already, and our Sword of the Animist. Cloud Key. This is really cool, not just because it's a good card in the deck, but because the flavor that they've put on it for the Edge of Eternities Commander product is cloud sculpting. This is what the Ilvoy do, and what our commander is so good at in the fiction. For 3 generic mana, we get an artifact that says, as it enters, we choose artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, or sorcery. We will choose artifact. And spells we cast of the chosen type cost 1 generic mana less to cast. So this discounts every artifact spell that we cast from anywhere by 1 generic mana. There are a couple of spells in our deck that this does nothing for. Moonsnare Prototype, for example, costs a blue and no generic, so it can't have its generic mana discounted. That's too bad. But Soul Ring only costs 1 generic, which means Cloud Key makes Soul Ring free. I think that's a pretty good trade-off. Next up, I've put in Heraldic Banner, originally from Throne of Eldraine. For 3 generic mana, we get an artifact that makes us choose a color as it enters. We will choose blue. It gives all of our blue creatures +1/+0, and it can add mana, add 1 mana of that color. So it's a manalith, taps for blue. It makes our commander, and I guess our blue creatures, but really just our commander, have 1 more power. That's okay for a manalith, especially for a deck where we want to try and get a little bit more combat damage out, and where we only have to get up to 21 rather than 40 in order to beat someone. Next up, we have the Lantern of Revealing, which we've talked about. We've seen the Sword of Fortune Frontier. We haven't seen Osgood Operation Double from the Doctor Who product. This card is crazy in this deck, and just very cool. So Osgood is a legendary human alien shapeshifter. It's a 2/2 for 2 and double blue that says when you cast it, create a token that's a copy of it, except it isn't legendary. So it works a little bit differently than the way that Brass Knuckles works, but it ends up the same way. You end up with 2 copies of this card in play, one of which is a token that isn't legendary. They have 2 abilities. The first is they can tap for colorless mana that can only be spent to cast artifact spells or to activate abilities of artifacts. So it's colorless mana rather than blue, and we can sort of only use it, we use it for artifacts rather than just things outside of our hand. So we can use it to cast spells cast artifact spells at least from our hand, which is pretty good. Or we can use it to activate abilities, like equip abilities. That's pretty great. However, we also have, remember, we get 2 of these. So we're getting 2 creatures that tap for this mana when we cast Osgood. We just have to wait until next turn to do that. But in addition, they have Paradox. Whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, we investigate. So when we cast anything from the top of our library, from exile, from our graveyard with Emery, whatever it may be, we make 2 clue tokens that immediately can tap for blue to cast spells in the same way that we just cast the last spell that triggered this. So if we cast, Moonsnare Prototype off the top of our library, both Osgoods will trigger and make 2 clues. Now we have a Moonsnare Prototype and 2 clues, which we can tap for a total of 3 mana to cast the next thing off the top of our library, which may be Heraldic Banner. We spend that mana to do it. When we do, the Osgoods trigger again, we get 2 more clues, and we're back to 3 mana available to us. This is just a crazy powerful ability and just a fun card that I don't see people play. I think it's very cool. We've seen the Sad Robot, we've seen the Mightstone and Weakstone, so that is our acceleration section. Let's start talking about interaction. Again, I just use the word removal as a shorthand for interaction. So we've seen Ether Spellbomb and Moonsnare Prototype and Surgical Skullbomb. Here is Bumbleflower's Sharepot. This is another artifact that comes with a second artifact, because for 2 generic mana, it enters and we make a food token. So we can tap both of those right away for blue mana using Menon's ability. In addition, for 5 mana and tap and sacrifice the Sharepot, destroy an on-land permanent. Activate only as a sorcery, but blow up anything that's not indestructible? Or a land? That's great removal. It's 7 mana, but it's 7 generic mana, and over the course of multiple turns. We're going to have plenty of mana to do this. And in the meantime, we've paid 2 and gotten 2 artifacts that we can tap for blue to cast spells from outside our hand. This is a mono blue deck, so we're running AFCS. AFCS is Actual Factual Counterspell. This is not the cheapest printing of Counterspell, but it's not super expensive compared to some other ones. I just love the Mystical Archive. Counterspell, if you don't know the card, it's 2 blue to counter target spell. It's the best counterspell out there. If you don't count the free counterspells like Fierce Guardianship or Force of Will, that kind of thing. Doing a good impression of Counterspell, though, is Ice Out. Ice Out is a cancel variant, which means cancel is just Counterspell, but it costs an additional generic mana, so it's the same cost as Ice Out. But Ice Out says counter target spell, however, it has Bargain, which means as we cast the spell, we can sacrifice an artifact, or an enchantment, or any token. We have some tokens in this that aren't artifacts already, but we have artifacts too. If we sacrifice one of those things to bargain Ice Out, it costs 1 less, so it stops being cancel and starts being counterspell. Pretty great. Speaking of a cancel variant, we have Saw It Coming. Saw It Coming counters target spell for 1 and double blue, so that's cancel, but we can also foretell it. Foretell is an ability from Kaldheim that says we can pay 2 generic mana and exile this card face down and cast it for its foretell cost on a later turn. Its foretell cost is 1 and a blue. So I know you're thinking, well, that's a total of 4 mana. But remember, we're paying 2 generic to foretell it, and on a later turn, we're casting it from exile for its foretell cost. Which means we're casting it from a place that's not our hand. So we can tap our artifacts to pay the foretell cost. We just have to pay the cost to foretell it initially in the normal way. So later on, it becomes a counterspell that we can cast using our artifacts. Similarly, Raven Form is another foretell card. It's 2 and a blue to exile an artifact or creature, and its controller makes a 1/1 bird. A bird is okay. It can fly, it can block our commander, and that's fine. Because if we need to get rid of a creature or an artifact, this just exiles it and it's gone. But we can also foretell this, again for 2 generic mana, and then on a later turn, it only costs 1. So is this better than Rapid Hybridization? Is it just more synergistic in this deck? Yeah, something like that. Anyway, I think it's cool to have another foretell card in this deck. We've already seen the Mightstone and Weakstone, so let's mention Meteor Golem. It's back in Foundations. It is a 7 mana 3/3 artifact golem, and when it enters, we destroy a non-land permanent opponent controls. So we can cast this off the top of our library and just blow something up, something that maybe is in the way of Menon. We can swing in and maybe win the game. Is that, Magical Christmas Land? Well, it seems like a pretty good place to be. So Meteor Golem is fun, and that covers it for our removal section. So we have a few more little sections of ways that we can contribute to our game plan, starting with protection. We've seen all of these cards already. We've seen K9, giving our commander and any of our other legendary creatures Ward 1. The Ilvoy Lightjammer gives whatever it snaps onto Hexproof. The Silver Shroud costume gives whatever it snaps onto Shroud, both of these until end of turn. And then Swiftfoot Boots gives, probably Minin, Hexproof as long as it's equipped. Next we have our Synergy section. These are cards that do something really interesting with our commander's abilities. We've seen all but one of them so far. Howling Mind is interesting because we can tap it for blue to turn it off on other people's turns. Emery is interesting because it gives us the ability to cast things from our graveyard, which lets us use our artifact, the mana our artifacts make thanks to Minin, to cast things from our graveyard. Ravenform and Saw It Coming, we can cast using Foretell from exile. Sword of Fortune Frontier and Oracle's Vault can put cards in exile that we can cast, and the same thing happens with Temporal Anchor once we scry things to the bottom of our library. But we also have Camp from the Fallout decks. Camp is the second fortification in Magic, I think. For 3 generic mana, we get an artifact fortification. Fortification is a type of artifact that is basically equipment for lands. So we have, instead of equip for 3 generic, it's fortify for 3 generic. And what it says is, whenever fortified land is tapped for mana, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. That's pretty okay. But if that creature shares a color with the mana that the land produced, create a junk token. So let's say we put this on a basic island, which we probably will. Whenever we tap that island for blue, we're going to put a counter on Minin, and because Minin shares a color with blue, we're also going to make a junk token. Junk tokens are that other kind of specified, like defined token type that I mentioned before. They say, just tap them and sack them. And you get to exile the top card of your library, and you can play that card for this turn at least, and you can only activate a junk token as a sorcery. So when we tap the fortified land, and we put a counter on Minin, assuming we're tapping an island, we make a junk token, which we can immediately tap for blue mana if we want to. Or we can tap it and sack it to get the top card of our library off the top of our library, letting us have access to what's below it, but also now that card is in exile. So maybe we want to be able to play that card. Maybe there was an island on top of our library. We use the junk token to get it into exile, and if we haven't made our land drop, we can play it right then. Or maybe it was a different different card type. Maybe it was Emery, let's say. We put Emery into exile. We can then cast them from exile because it's not our hand, using the mana from the artifacts that we tap, thanks to Minin's ability. So really cool synergy in Camp, and from all of these cards here, I think. Our next section is tokens. We've seen a lot of these, so let's talk a little bit more about what these tokens are. Bloodforged Battle Axe can make copies of itself. Bumbleflower Sharepot comes in with a food. Camp can make junk tokens. And Esoteric Duplicator can make a copy of itself or anything else, any other artifact that we sacrifice. Forensic Gadgeteer is a 2/3 Vidalcan Artificer Detective for 2 and a blue. This is one of our creatures that's not legendary and not an artifact. That says whenever we cast an artifact spell, investigate. So every artifact we cast comes with a clue. In addition, activated abilities of artifacts we control cost 1 generic mana less to activate, minimum 1. So the food that comes in with Bumbleflower Sharepot only costs 1 in tap and sack to gain 3 life. Bumbleflower Sharepot itself costs 4 in tap and sack to destroy a non-land permanent. We have equipment in this deck. It's what the deck is built around. Equip costs 1 less. This Bloodforged Battle Axe costs 1 less to equip, and it just costs 1. These Brass Knuckles still only cost 1 because there's a minimum cost of 1. But that applies to all the things I mentioned and the clue tokens that we're making every time we cast an artifact spell. They just pay 1, sack them, draw a card. Clue tokens are such a great way for us to get cards in our hand and clear the top of our library. Forensic Gadgeteer is super useful in this deck. So we've seen the Brass Knuckles. Let's talk about Mechanized Production. So I began work on this deck, and I had 3 cards in it that were alternate victory conditions. I think that the 2 I did not include are in the considering section, so check that out if you want to see them. But Mechanized Production says for 2 and double blue, we have an aura that enchants an artifact that we control. At the beginning of our upkeep, we just make a token copy of that aura, of that artifact. Maybe we put it on camp, and we can have more fortifications. Maybe we put it on the Bumbleflower Share Pot, and every time we get it to come in, it comes in with a food token and we can blow more things up. Maybe we put it on a Soul Ring, and every upkeep we get another Soul Ring. It's crazy. But that's not the only thing it does. As part of the same trigger, when we make a token copy of the artifact during our upkeep, Mechanized Production then checks to see if we control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another. And if we do, we just win the game. So I don't think it's a good idea to put Mechanized Production on a clue token, but we sure could, because we're making an awful lot of clue tokens that are all artifacts just named clue. So I think it's better to put this on something and get more value out of it and really not use it as an alternate victory condition. Except for the fact that Mechanized Production doesn't say that you look to see if you have 8 or more artifacts with the same name as the artifact this enchants. So we could put this on our Soul Ring and then make 8 or more clues, and at the start of our next upkeep, we'll make a new Soul Ring and then win the game because we happen to control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another. Mechanized Production, like being able to steal the game with that alternate victory, is really sweet, but even without that, we're getting a lot of value off of it, depending on what is in play once we're able to cast it. I like this card quite a bit. So Osgood makes a token copy of itself, but also it makes a lot of clue tokens. Every time we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, both copies of Osgood will investigate. Next up, we have our Thopter Spy Network, of course. It makes our Thopters every upkeep if we control an artifact when we are in our upkeep. Mechan Assembler is an uncommon from Edge of Eternities. For 4 and a blue, we get a 4/4 Artifact Robot Artificer, so we can cast this from the top of our library, but we can't immediately tap it for blue to cast more things from outside our hand because it is a creature. However, whenever another artifact we control enters, so we don't have to cast it, it just has to enter, we get to make a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. We only get to do that once per turn, and that also has Summoning Sickness, but essentially this means probably every turn, we're going to end up with a bonus 2/2 robot on the ground, the same way that Thopter Spy Network is probably giving us a bonus 1/1 Thopter in the air. Mechan Assembler is, we could definitely have a more powerful card in here, but we sure could have a less powerful one. It just seems really fun. I like that we're able to get this out here and also cast it off the top of our library, as opposed to something like Thopter Spy Network or Forensic Agiteer. We've seen Tamio's Journal, just makes us clue tokens at the start of our upkeep, and we've seen Transmutation Font, which doesn't automatically make things, but it does untap every turn, and we can just tap it with no further cost to make a blood, clue, or food token every turn. So those are our sources of tokens. We're going to go next to the section I'm just calling Value. Value are cards that are just giving us an awful lot from just being in the deck and doing what the deck is doing when they're here. So Imposter Mech is where we're going to start. It's a 3/1 vehicle for 1 and a blue that crews for 3. We can cast it from the top of our library. It's a 3/1, it crews for 3. Notably, our commander has power 3, so we can crew this right away. But why would we? Well, the reason is because of its other ability. We may have it enter as a copy of a creature an opponent controls, except that it is a vehicle artifact with crew 3 and loses all other card types. So if our opponent has a big scary creature with a huge power and toughness, they've got a Galta or something, we can have this 2-mana card enter as a copy of Galta that, yes, it can't attack or block because it's not a creature until it's crewed, so we just have to crew it and we do whatever we want with it. Even better than that, it comes in and is, I don't know, what's a good card that just provides a lot of value? Maybe Atraxa? Would we like to have our own Atraxa? You know, just getting a proliferate every turn? We don't have that many counters in our deck. Maybe that doesn't matter. We have a few, though. Maybe like a Brutaclad would be pretty fun. You know, making even more artifact tokens every time and making more tokens from it. In any case, something that provides a lot of value even when that creature happens not to be a creature. That's what Imposter Mech is here to do. And if it happens to need to attack or block, we can also do that with it by crewing it. So yeah, take the biggest, best, most valuable thing on the battlefield and get one of your own. Next, we have Liberator, Urza's Battle Thopter. I am not going to talk about the fact that Urza put a giant face of his own on top of Liberator. It's just ridiculous. So, Liberator is 3 generic mana for a legendary artifact Thopter. That's a 1/2 with flash and flying. So, it has flash. It's an artifact. We can cast this off the top of our library on our opponent's turn. Not just that, once it's on the battlefield, we can cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. So all of the cards that we have, all of the artifacts that we have in play that can tap for blue, while Liberator is on the battlefield, we can use that to play off the top of our library at flash speed. We can do that on our opponent's end step if we want to, and flash in all of these crazy artifacts as long as Liberator's off the battlefield. We can also do that from our hand. We can't use the mana from our artifacts that Menon's giving them the ability to tap for to cast the spells from our hand, but we sure can cast artifact spells and colorless spells from our hand with flash. Which is pretty sweet. In addition, if that wasn't enough, whenever we cast a spell, if the mana spent to cast that spell the amount of mana is greater than Liberator's power, Liberator gets bigger. So we might want to just keep casting these things and what am I trying to say? To sequence in it a way that gets Liberator bigger and bigger so that we can swing it in the air alongside our commander. So in a way, Liberator is, other than having a slightly lower power, is a much better Shimmer Mirror. So, but if you want to double up on this effect, Shimmer Mirror exists. It also costs 3 generic mana. It's worth including in the deck if you would like to do that as well. Next in this value section is Kappa Cannoneer. Kappa Cannoneer, this card was a mistake. This card is really good. For 5 and a blue, you get a 4/4 Artifact Turtle Warrior with Improvise. Improvise means you can tap your artifacts to pay the generic mana cost of Kappa Cannoneer. And I know maybe you're thinking, well, I can already tap my artifacts for blue, but what if your Kappa Cannoneer is in your hand? You wouldn't be able to tap your artifacts for blue to cast spells out of your hand, but you can tap them to pay its generic mana costs using Improvise. So a pretty sweet option with Kappa Cannoneer's Improvise ability. And I mentioned that it's a 4/4 creature for 6. It's not. It's a 4/4 creature that whenever it or another artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it can't be blocked this turn. So it enters and immediately puts a 1/1 counter on itself. It can't be blocked this turn, but it can't probably attack this turn either, so whatever. But next turn, how many artifacts are raining down from the top of your library? 4? Does that make it a 9/9 unblockable this turn? What about the turn after that? Does that make it a 13/13 or more? Well, that's okay. They're probably just going to destroy it. Oh wait, it has Ward 4 as well. Kappa Cannoneer is ridiculous. And even with its ward, because it's so strong and unblockable and gets so much bigger in this deck, it's a little bit of removal bait, which means our opponents, with their spot removal, if anyone's running spot removal in Commander, they might use it on Kappa Cannoneer rather than our commander, not realizing that they're at, 18 commander damage, and we don't need our artifacts to swing in with our commander and beat them now. Yeah, and if that's not the case, yeah, maybe they have, only a few commander damage, but they've gotten down to like 15 life. The Kappa Cannoneer might go from 5 to 15 in a single turn, considering all the artifact spells and artifact counters that we're making, or artifact tokens rather, that we're making, and then we swing in with it, and that's just game. So that's our value section. We've already talked about our Wincon. Mechanized Production is a really fun card. We don't have to play it as a Wincon, but if you like alternate victory conditions, again, check the considering section at the bottom of the Moxfield page, and you'll be able to see a couple of other options tagged as Wincons. So finally, we have our Wrath. We're only running one, and it's kind of a spicy one. This is Desynchronization from the Assassin's Creed set. For 2 and double blue, we get an instant that says return each non-land permanent that's not historic to its owner's hand. Historic means artifacts, legends, and sagas. We don't have any sagas in our deck, but we sure have 50 artifacts. 50 artifacts and over 30 lands. So most of the things in our deck are either legendary or artifacts, so they're not getting bounced. What is getting bounced is most of our opponents' entire boards. Maybe not their commanders, or if they have any other legendary creatures, not their mana rocks or their other artifacts that they may be running, but all their enchantments, all of their battles probably, maybe not their planeswalkers since those are legendary, but yeah, it's not a perfect board wipe, but all it's meant to do is A, slow down our opponents so that we can B, get in since a lot of their blockers aren't there anymore. Desynchronization is an interesting card, and I would rather run an interesting card that works sometimes than a boring card that works every single time. We're not here to win, we're here to play Commander. And probably win. Okay, let's talk about our land base. So our curve is fine, especially in a deck like this. Normally you'd be used to seeing this as 2 drops and this as 3 drops, but not here. We've got a lot going on, and we're still running 38 lands. So if you want to cut lands, I don't recommend it, but you sure could. So let's talk about our the lands we actually chose. I've got 27 basic islands in this deck. We want to be able to hit our land drops, so we're running a sufficient number of lands. We want to be able to have blue mana, so we're going to have that blue mana. We can't use Menon's ability to cast Menon, so we need to be able to get up to 5 mana on turn 5, or at least, in order to get our commander out and to start going off. So 27 islands, not terrible. We've got these 2 other lands, which are not actually fixing, they're more ramp. Myriad Landscape comes in tapped and taps for colorless, but if we pay 2 and tap it and sack it, we can search for 2 islands, 2 basic islands, and put them on the battlefield tapped. So we've turned 1 land drop, even with a little bit of mana and time, into 2 lands. Tiny little bit of ramp, even if it's slow. Temple of the False God is also slow ramp. It is a soul ring on a land. It just doesn't tap for anything until you control 4 or more other lands. That's okay. I know some people don't like Temple of the False God. I think it's just fine, and for a deck like this, it can't hurt. So, we also have a bunch of utility lands. Let's talk about these. Academy Ruins and Buried Ruin are kind of doing the same thing, or something similar in this deck. Academy Ruins is a little expensive for a land. It is a legendary land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 1 and a blue and tap it to put an artifact card from our graveyard on top of our library. Remember, with our commander out, we can cast artifacts from the top of our library. So in a way, this is putting that card in our hand and letting us play it by tapping all of our artifacts. If we need to get something out of our graveyard, we don't have to do it with just our regrowth effect from before or with Emery. Academy Ruins will do it for us. Buried Ruin is not quite as good, but still useful. It taps for colorless, of course, and then for 2 generic and tap and sack, we can return an artifact from our graveyard to our hand. So it's going to our hand, which is all right. We can't cast it with the mana from our artifacts that Menon is giving them the ability to produce, but we do have it in our hand. That does cost us this Buried Ruin, though. So definitely not quite as good as Academy Ruins, but also like $9 cheaper. So okay redundancy. I like to run Demolition Field in most of my decks, just because land destruction can be rude, but sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes your opponent is running a Rogue's Passage, and you don't want to be hit with an unblockable creature. Sometimes they're running a Maze of Ith, or a Glacial Chasm, or worse, like a Tolarian Academy, or a Gaia's Cradle, and it's just overwhelming the board. It's going to kill you and kill everyone else. Demolition Field is a polite 1 out of 100 card that can maybe get you out of that. It's a land that taps for colorless, or you can pay 2, tap and sack it to blow up a non-basic land. Your opponent then gets to find a basic and put it into the battlefield untapped, and then so do you. So you've tapped probably 3 lands to do this, but you get an untapped land back, so it really only costs you 2 to do so. Demolition Field is just so useful and such a good upgrade to Field of Ruin. That's what I like. Next we have Fountain Port. Fountain Port is in here because sometimes we have mana that we just don't get a chance to use. Mana that's not from our artifacts. We might cast so many spells from the top of our library that we don't have the ability to cast things from our hand as easily. Or we just end up with a handful of lands and then another land on top of our library and nothing to do about it. So what do we want to use our mana for? Fountain Port. It taps for colorless. We can pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice a token to draw a card. So we can take, it's a little bit more expensive, but we can take one of our non-clues and crack it, essentially. We can pay 3, tap it, tap Fountain Port, and pay a life to make a 1/1 fish, which, who knows, maybe we just need a creature. But that's also a token that next turn Fountain Port can sacrifice to draw a card. Or maybe we just have plenty of mana and nothing to do with it, so we want to bank it. We pay 4, tap Fountain Port, and make a treasure token. The flexibility of Fountain Port is great in this deck, and even if it doesn't do much for us, it's still coming in untapped. That's not nothing. Next is the Stellar Sights version of Inventor's Fair. This is a legendary land that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, so you have Metalcraft, you gain a life. And it taps for colorless, but also you can pay 4, tap it, and sack it to search your library for an artifact, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. But again, only if you have Metalcraft, 3 or more artifacts in play. We're always going to be gaining life from this. We're always going to be able to sacrifice this and find whatever artifact we really need if we really need to. Being able to do that, just the flexibility of this, even if we're not just loving the life gain, is terrific. And it's probably worth the money because this can go in a lot of different decks. What is my favorite thing to find with Inventor's Fair in this deck? I think Repurposing Bay, because it lets us keep doing that, keep sacrificing artifacts and finding different other artifacts. That just seems like a lot of fun. Next up is Rivendell. Rivendell is a legendary land that enters tapped unless we control a legendary creature. So if we've got our commander, it comes in untapped. It taps for blue. It might as well just be an island, except as long as we control a legendary creature, we can pay 1 and a blue and tap it to scry 2. Scrying, of course, lets us play with the top of our library, lets us have a little card selection. It helps. You could side grade this to Castle Vantress. I think Castle Vantress might be a downgrade, but Castle Vantress comes in untapped if you control any islands, and I think you tap it and pay 2 in double blue to scry 2, something along those lines. Regardless, I think Castle Vantress might not be quite as good as Rivendell, but if you're looking for something similar to Rivendell and you want more of that card selection in your mana base, Castle Vantress is a good choice. You've got plenty of islands. Next up is Rogue's Passage. We're trying to win with commander damage, so we've got a Rogue's Passage. Taps for colorless, or a 4 and tap to make a creature unblockable. Sounds good. Next we have Scene of the Crime. This is really fun. We have 50 artifacts in our deck, and this is one of them. It's an artifact land, and it is a clue. It has the clue text. We can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card. It comes in tapped, that's true, but it taps for colorless, or we can tap it and another untapped creature we control to make a mana of any color. Or, once it's untapped, we can tap it to produce blue mana that we can only use to cast spells from outside our hand, because it's an artifact, and that's what Wincon gives it. So, this is a way for us to turn a land into a card draw, freeing up whatever's on top of our library by putting it in our hand. Maybe we find something better underneath it. Anyway, Scene of the Crime is a really fun include in this, and it's the only land that's probably going to come in tapped, since Rivendell likely won't. Finally, we have Secluded Starforge. This is a new card from Edge of Eternities. It is a land that taps for colorless, or it has 2 other abilities. For 2 and tap any number of untapped artifact you control, you give a power bonus to one of your creatures equal to the number of artifacts you tapped. Activate only as a sorcery. So if we have, 10 artifacts in play, we can tap all of them, 2 mana and Secluded Starforge, to give our commander +10/+0. Is that enough to win the game? Okay, maybe not. Tap 20 of our artifacts, or maybe 18 to put Wincon up to a 21 power. Whatever we need, as long as Wincon is not getting blocked or removed, one of our opponents is getting removed. Secluded Starforge is a great choice in this, even if we have to activate that as a sorcery. But, like I said with Fountain Port, sometimes we just have extra mana lying around. If we do, we can pay 5 and tap Secluded Starforge to make a 2/2 robot. It's a robot, it's a creature, we like a robot. It's an artifact that next turn, once it has no summoning sickness, we can tap it for blue with Minon's ability. Just helpful. So that is Drops of Jupiter. That's our deck. Again, I'm going to be releasing new Edge of Eternities Commander decks every Thursday until the Spider-Man set drops at the end of September. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander or a style of deck for that commander. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.